I spent the summer of 2010 in a little slice of Idaho wilderness that most people will never visit or even know exists. My uncle owns an old privately leased hunting cabin near the edges of the Boise National Forest, about a 2-hour drive from any big city. We're talking a long gravel road and no cell phone reception, for the most part, and dense clusters of pines and Douglas fir that seem to swallow every sound except the wind. I was 19 years old, helping my uncle out by doing some light repairs, stalking firewood, making sure the place would be livable for the upcoming hunting season. That cabin was worn. It had no electricity except for a gas generator. It had a water pump out back and squeaky floorboards that never let you forget you were alone out there. It was mid-June, and although some days were pleasantly warm, the nights got cold and eerily quiet. It wasn't my first time out in the woods. I'd grown up in Idaho and loved outdoor adventures, but I'd never stayed someplace so utterly remote before, alone for that matter, for weeks at a time. Still, I welcomed the solitude, figuring I could catch up on some reading and maybe do some fishing in the nearby creek. My uncle had taught me a few basics to keep myself safe. How to bear-proof the trash, keep an eye out for cougars, be mindful that sometimes, especially at dusk, you can sense animals before you ever see them. I was about a week into my stay when I noticed the first weird thing. Footprints. Not the usual elk or deer tracks, which were abundant around those parts, but something that looked canine, only it was spectacularly too large. Like a big dog had stepped through the mud, and I mean the biggest dog you've ever seen. More odd yet was the placement. Normally, animal tracks followed some sort of pattern, but these seemed spaced out, like something had been walking upright. A distinct line of them led from the tree line toward the cabin's back door, then disappeared into the pine needles. They were faint, now partially dried in the sun, but there was enough left to make me do a double take. I'm no expert tracker, but I've spent enough time outdoors to recognize an unusual trail. I brushed it off, thinking maybe a stray dog had been sniffing around. We did sometimes get hunters' dogs wandering close by if they got off leash, but upright? Maybe it was hopping or limping or something. I forced myself to forget about it, but a tickle of doubt remained in the back of my mind. That night I was sitting on the old rickety porch, reading by the last streaks of daylight. The porch faced a clearing that stretched about 50 yards before the real thick forest began. No road lights, no neighbors, just the hush of the wind through the pines. That was when I heard a rustling sound from somewhere out in the clearing. Could have been a deer, maybe the wind. But then came a single low growl, so quiet I almost believed I'd imagined it. I froze, straining my ears. Nothing else, just the hiss of the breeze. Then the cicadas kicked up, singing in that way that always feels like they're drowning out something more important. I told myself I was spooking over nothing, and went inside. But I made sure to bolt the door, something I hadn't bothered doing before. Over the next few days, I started to see other signs. I'd occasionally find strange scratches near the cabin's baseboards on the outside walls, long, thin gouges that didn't look like random animal claw marks. They were too close together, almost parallel. One evening, about an hour after dark, I had the generator running so I could heat up some soup on the electric hot plate. I then heard a hard thump on one of the porch posts. Grabbing a flashlight, I peeked outside through a side window, thinking I was about to see a bear rummaging around. Instead, I caught a glimpse of something tall, a canine shape silhouetted against the moonlit clearing. It was there for a split second. Then it shot off into the darkness, too fast for me to even process. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly shut off the porch light, killing the generator. I stayed crouched by the window, listening for movement. I don't scare easily, but the shape I saw was just too large to be a typical wolf or coyote, and that sense of it moving on two legs clung to my mind. Still, I tried to make sense of it. A tall wolf on its hind legs, maybe, but why? Sure, they can stand or hop around for short bursts, but not like a human, and they would need a good reason to do that. It made no sense. I slept that night with a loaded shotgun next to me, though I barely got any sleep. A few days later, I drove into the nearest town to pick up more supplies and to call my uncle from the payphone at the only gas station. He told me not to worry. He said I was probably seeing a black bear or a large dog. He reminded me to keep the doors locked and the trash sealed. I didn't mention the footprints or the standing part because I knew he'd scoff at that. Reluctantly, I headed back to the cabin, deciding I'd give it another week before bailing out. I was starting to feel on edge at all hours, like something was watching me through the trees. On my second evening back, the air turned unusually still. There was no breeze and no animal noises, just this thick silence. I wandered out to the porch with my flashlight, scanning the clearing. Nothing. Then, from behind me, I heard a scraping sound against the wood panels of the cabin. My blood turned cold. I spun around, shining the flashlight across the front wall. That's when I saw it. Its silhouette. About 7 feet tall, hunched, with a head like a German shepherd or a wolf, muzzle elongated, ears perked up. Even in the poor light, I could see the rough fur on its back. 2 eyes glowed, reflecting the flashlight's beam with a pale, sickly greenish-yellow shine. It had a wide chest, and the arms were more like that of a man than any animal. They were pinned at its sides as it pressed up against the cabin wall. Its claws were long, curved, and resting against the wood. I froze. I swear I could feel its gaze, like a physical thing. Time seemed to slow down, and my heart pounded so violently, I thought I might pass out. The creature's lip curled, revealing fangs. Without thinking, I took a step back slowly, the boards under my boot squeaking. Its ears twitched at the sound. Then, in a motion almost too quick to register, it dropped onto all fours and bolted away from the porch, clearing the steps in a single leap. I heard a heavy thud as it landed on the ground. Then it loped into the dark, disappearing into the tree line. I was left standing there, shotgun forgotten inside, my flashlight shaking so badly the beam was jumping around. It felt like a long time before I could even breathe normally. I rushed inside, locking the door. I even slid a heavy table in front of it. I then grabbed my gun. I stayed up the rest of the night with every light on, the generator whining in the background. Every so often, I heard distant snapping twigs, the faintest howls, but nothing came back to the porch. Morning brought relief. With the sun out, I went outside with the gun to inspect the cabin's exterior. Sure enough, there were fresh scratch marks where I'd seen the creature. The tracks around the porch were a confusing mix of paw prints and something that looked more humanoid. The front paws or maybe feet had a different shape, as if the creature could switch between standing upright and dropping to all fours, naturally and easily. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, just looking at those prints. I didn't want to stay another minute, but I did need to gather my stuff, secure the cabin, and hope I never had to come back alone. Still, I told myself it might have just been a big wolf. It was suffering from mange or some other condition, even though I knew that couldn't account for how it stood on 2 legs with such ease. My rational side flailed for any explanation, but in my gut I knew I had encountered something beyond the ordinary wildlife of Idaho. I waited until midday when the sun was high, to hurry and pack my gear. I made several runs to the truck, occasionally spinning around to check the forest line. At one point I heard the crunching of leaves, and my eyes landed on a shape crouched among the thick pines, nearly blending in with the dark. It was about 100 yards away, just watching me. Though it was too dark to see details, I recognized that canine silhouette. My heart seemed to stop, but I kept myself moving, refusing to appear panicked. Maybe it respected that I was leaving, like I was no longer a threat or even a curiosity. It didn't charge or try to stop me. I tossed the last bag into the truck, jumped in, and peeled out down the gravel road. My uncle was upset that I left early, but after hearing the tremor in my voice when I tried to explain, he didn't push me too hard. I never quite told him the full story. I said it was a big wolf or a strange bear that put me on edge. He's teased me about it over the years, but I know what I saw. I think about it sometimes, how large and unnaturally human those movements were, the intelligence behind its eyes. There was no sense of aimless, wild aggression. It felt calculating, observant, like it was deciding whether or not to do something to me. The cabin is still in our family, though I've refused to return there alone ever since. A few other relatives have stayed up there, mostly in groups. One cousin of mine even joked, "Did you see the werewolf yet?" Though we all chuckled, I noticed my uncle's face stiffen a bit, as if he wasn't entirely sure my story was a joke. Sometimes at holiday gatherings, he'll tell folks, he swears he saw some sort of monster. Everyone laughs, but I smile tightly and think, if only you actually knew. That's my story. People can believe it or not, but I will tell you this. If you ever wander deep into the wilderness near the Boise National Forest and hear a low growl or see a hulking shadow among the pines, you might want to think twice before staying the night. The dogman, or whatever it is, could be out there, keeping a good eye on you. If it decides to step into your light, you won't forget it, because I haven't. I'm a female, and I moved to Florida a couple of years ago. I never once thought that something sinister could ever dwell in my area, but I guess I was wrong. I discovered it very quickly after moving here. My family doesn't own a farm, but we do have plenty of animals. Chickens, geese, cats, and dogs, to name just a few. My cats and dogs normally stay inside, so they were never touched. But the chickens and geese were often mutilated by something, beyond recognition. Most of the time, just the feathers would be left, and maybe a foot or a wing. Logically, this could be explained as a raccoon or a bobcat. But when the geese began to go missing, that had to be something different. For the people who don't know, pilgrim geese are big birds. They're loud when they get attacked, but several of our full-grown adults went missing without a trace. Obviously, they could have flown off, but we kept their wings clipped, so they couldn't. However, the screaming, that is what gave me the 100% assurance that something wasn't right in those woods, because something out there would scream, and it sounded like a child and a woman being murdered in the most cruel ways. I asked my neighbors, but of course it was the usual, "Stay out of the woods at night," that they answered with. Fast forward a couple of years, and this creature had just become part of the regular for me, and for some reason I never thought of it much anymore. My parents were leaving town for about 2 weeks. They did this yearly, sometimes twice a year, so leaving me by myself was never an issue. I wasn't a party person, and they had no reason to distrust me. The first rule I disobeyed, though, was the have no people over rule. About 2 hours after they left, I started up my car and went to go get my girlfriend and a few others. We did what most teenagers do. Smoked and drank, but nothing super extreme. That first night, we just hung out. Skip ahead to the third night. It was just me and my girlfriend, Alice. Alice and I were just lazing around the house when she brought up the idea to go for a walk. At the time, it was 2 a.m., so I figured what was the worst that could happen. I didn't live in the middle of nowhere, but far enough in my little community that some people didn't even know there were houses towards the woods. We ventured out and were having fun when she turned to me and suggested we should go in the woods. For 3 nights in a row, we could hear the screaming all throughout the night, and I thought that would be the last place she'd want to go. But we did anyway, my naivete telling me that this creature probably lived deeper in the woods than we were going to go. We set out, using our phone flashlights, giggling and holding each other's hands. We'd only been dating for a few months, so we were still in the honeymoon phase. I was enjoying myself. Overall, it was a perfect summer night. We walked far into the woods, and we soon found a clearing. Alice skipped to the middle of it and spun around with a smile. I had not yet stepped into the clearing when I got that uneasy sensation. I have terrible anxiety, so I brushed it off as Alice making me nervous. She giggled at me and said, "Take a picture." I promptly took out a disposable camera and snapped a picture. I walked over towards her, tucking the camera in my hoodie pocket and holding her in a tight hug. Her head rested on mine since she was a little bit taller. She took a deep breath, which made me look up at her and her looking down at me. "I love you," she said with a smile. In that moment, I was so happy. My heart fluttered, and I opened my mouth to say it back, when, to the left of me, a voice spoke. "I love you." It came in my girlfriend's exact tone, but it sounded so distorted. It felt as if my heart dropped right into my stomach. I could tell hers did too, as her smile disappeared. I looked towards the voice, and it felt as if my heart had tumbled out of my body and onto the forest floor. In the light of the full moon, this thing, a buck, stood just outside the clearing. But there was something wrong with it, all wrong. It stood on its hind legs like a man. Its lips had been curled back into a smile with rows and rows of sharp teeth, and a tongue hung out, dripping with saliva. That's when I realized the bird noises, the crickets in the forest, had gone completely dead silent. The wind pushed towards the buck, which pushed the scent of decay away from us and further back. I pushed Alice behind me, like my 5'6" self was going to do anything to protect her. "I love you, Vina." It spoke and used the nickname Alice had given me. It stepped out into the clearing. It must have been 7 feet tall. Its arms and legs were too long for its body, and its body didn't even look like it was alive. It was so skinny, to the point where the bones cut out through the skin of the deer. Alice screamed and took off in the other direction. This thing began to laugh as I hauled tail behind her. I had no flashlight, and it was beyond me how Alice took off without running into anything. But of course, I managed to faceplant into the forest floor. I looked up, tasting the blood from my nose, and as I was about to take off again, this thing grabbed the back of my hoodie and threw me backwards. The impact of me hitting the ground knocked the breath out of me, making me want to cry. I took in a shaky breath when it grabbed my leg and pulled me close. It stared at me and screamed in my face, "I love you, Vina." I grabbed the nearest thing my arm could reach, which was apparently a rock, and I smacked it as hard as I could in the face. It seemed to howl, and it stumbled backwards. I took off as fast as I could to catch up with Alice. We must have run over a mile with this thing crashing through the woods behind us before we burst out of the woods and scrambled back into my house. We locked everything down behind us, turning on all the lights. She finally got a good look at my face and told me the blood from my nose covered half of my face and most of my neck. Blood from my knees and legs seeped through my jeans and out the rips. She told me she thought I was going to pass out on the spot, but she did her best to clean and bandage me up. Alice and I just sat on my bed, not sure what to do after that. We didn't speak, not even when the dogs began to go crazy. Alice grabbed my hand as tightly as she could. The pain from my nose now gone, I could only feel the throbbing of my knees and legs. Something outside was tapping on the house and scurrying across the roof for hours. Eventually, Alice fell asleep, but I couldn't. Every noise made me jump. Every growl from the dogs made me want to soil myself. I felt so guilty. I knew what was in those woods, but I was just so wrapped up with Alice, I'd completely forgotten about how dangerous this thing could be. And it knew her voice now. It knew my nickname. I did not sleep the rest of that night, and at first light I woke Alice up and drove her back home, where we both passed out in her bed exhausted. Eventually, I went back home with Alice, and we stayed a few more nights, each night hearing that thing outside, screaming and running around. I'll never again underestimate what is in those woods. About a year ago, in Great Falls, Montana, I was living in a camper with my boyfriend at the time, Chris, and my friend, T. One late night, it was freezing cold in the middle of winter. None of us could sleep, and all our phones were dead. The camper had no power, so Chris and I decided we were going to go to the bank, just right down the street from where the RV was parked, because they had some posts with outlets in them. When we got there, we plugged in our phones. As my phone was charging, we heard a really weird noise. I began looking around. There was this tree nearby that was about 3 feet away from us. Standing in the middle of this tree was a woman. She was motionless and just staring at me. I freaked out, turning and whispering to Chris, "Do you see that woman?" He looked around for a moment, then replied, "What woman? I don't see anyone." I froze for a second, then looked back at the tree. That woman was still there. Trying to take my eyes off of her, I looked up, and to my surprise, I saw 2 branches. The left side had 6 babies, and the right side had 6 kids. I started to look around more, and I saw 16 more of these things, all in the distance, just staring at me from the trees. I looked over at a bench under a tree at the entrance of the bank, and I saw an elderly couple. I could tell they were the same kind of people. Once I saw them, I began hearing voices, but they were in different languages. I hurried to my phone and turned it on. Using Google Translate, I repeated what was said. It seemed to be random things, or perhaps they were telling me a story. After looking up from my Google Translate, I looked around and they had all disappeared. I told Chris that we need to leave. As we were grabbing our things, getting ready to head back, I heard the talking again. I tried putting it in Google Translate as well. Google Translate came back with Scene 2. I looked up again, seeing the old people and the woman. I began to yell back, "You're not real. You're just in my head. Go away." The moment I said that, I saw the woman's mouth curl into a smile, showing the whitest teeth I'd ever seen. I told Chris to hurry. We grabbed everything, all while that thing just smiled at me. I was not sticking around. The 2 of us began running off, and I heard them say something else. My phone didn't have service, so I had to wait to get back to Wi-Fi to put it on my phone. I kept repeating what I'd heard under my breath so I wouldn't forget it. As soon as I was back, I put it into Google Translate. It said, "Run. When the woman smiles, you're in danger." I was freaked out, but tried to stop thinking about it. As the night went on, I kept having this strange feeling like someone was watching me. It seemed to be coming from the window. I looked through it. I saw that old couple on the bench across the street. They'd followed me back. I began to cry, but after a while I calmed down. I looked outside again, and they'd disappeared. I never saw them again. To this day, I won't go back to that bank at night. That was the weirdest and creepiest thing I've ever experienced. My brother, his ex, our friend Lauren, my 2 dogs, and I took a road trip from Orcas Island, Washington, out to the Olympic Peninsula back in 2014. We camped out the first night in the rain. The next night, we drove down to La Push. This is coincidentally where the Twilight movies were filmed. We arrived at our destination, a place called Third Beach, around 4 p.m., and saw that there were "No Dogs" signs posted everywhere. The girls tried to convince me to leave my dogs in the car, but I just wasn't going to do that. My dogs are like my children. I love them, and I take them with me everywhere I go. While we were talking, my dogs just kept staring out into the dense foliage, which was kind of creeping me out. But we decided we'd take our chances with the dogs, and we started down the trail. I noticed that it was totally silent. There were no birds singing, no insects chirping. I mean, you could literally hear a pin drop. Yeah, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. My dogs kept stopping and staring out into the forest, which had the trail boxed into either side of us. It got so bad, I had to leash them up just to keep them moving. We got down to the beach. Lauren undressed into her swimming clothes and ran into the ocean. We set up camp right up against the woods, as we could see the tide coming in all the way into where the beach met the forest. So we had a little island of sand to pitch our tent and get a little fire going. It was eerily quiet out there still, but we had a small portable speaker with us, so we played some music to lighten the mood. It got dark and we started to settle down for the night. The girls went to bed and my brother and I stayed up drinking beer. We weren't drunk or anything like that, just enjoying a couple of delicious Rainier beers before turning in for the night. Because of how close we were to the woods, I had the ocean to my back and I was facing the forest. We could hear something moving around out there, but we thought it was raccoons. There are quite a few of them in that area. My dogs began growling and raising their hackles, so I figured I would try to see what it was, just to be sure. I turned on my headlamp, and to my horror, I could see 2 eyes looking back at me. The eye shine was a milky white in the dim light cast from my headlamp. They looked like 2 twin moons, marbles the size of a fist and about 4 to 5 inches apart. We didn't have any guns, so we started shouting and throwing rocks and sticks at the thing, thinking maybe it was a mountain lion. It turned its head away, and you could see how big it was by the profile of its eyes, making them look even more like big, perfectly round marbles. We could hear it crashing off into the brush, and we went into our tent. The girls sleepily asked us what the heck was going on out there. We told them we had chased off some raccoons, not wanting to creep them out. I couldn't sleep a wink after that. My dogs kept growling and whining, and I could hear sticks snapping in the woods, not even 10 feet from the tent. It sounded like something was walking right up to the tent. Then it paused before slowly pressing what looked to be a stick into the tent flap. The dogs were growling so low and loud, it sounded like we had a diesel engine in there with us. I don't think any of us were asleep when my dog snapped at the stick or whatever, causing it to withdraw, and we could hear the thing walking back off into the woods. What was weird was it sounded like it was dragging something in the sand behind it. It finally started getting light out, and so we got up and tried to enjoy the beach for the day. My dogs were chasing seagulls, and we made some breakfast before making our way down the beach toward a coastal waterfall that we could see a couple miles south from our campsite. While we were walking, we noticed the tide was coming in very quickly. We didn't even make it to the waterfall before the tide forced us up onto a big pile of driftwood. The undertow was strong there, and there's also a phenomenon known as sneaker waves, which come out of nowhere and can pull you out into the current. The waves were breaking on the driftwood, and I was worried my dogs were going to get pulled under, so we decided to try to enter the woods and make our way back to the campsite from there. This was no easy feat, as the woods were so thick and overgrown that it made bushwhacking very difficult. We made our way into the bush, and it got extremely quiet again. We could no longer hear the sound of the waves on the beach, and just then, a small branch fell into the brush right in front of me. I looked up just in time to see what looked to be a giant pale white tadpole swinging from tree to tree above us. I say swinging because it had what looked like 2 arms, but its body was like an overgrown slug or something. I only caught the one brief glimpse, and no one else had seen it, so I thought maybe my eyes were just playing tricks on me. This place was home to the infamous banana slug, after all, but this thing was way too big to be a slug, and slugs don't have arms, right? We could hardly move through the dense coastal undergrowth, plus it sounded like something was swinging through the trees in circles around us. My dogs were barking and running in circles chasing the sound of whatever the thing was. Lauren thought we were lost, so she started crying, and between the branches breaking and the dogs barking, we were all a bit stressed out. A big branch broke right above us, that thing falling down from the tree right on top of me. I felt a searing pain in my shoulder. I reached up to pull this thing off of me. It was about the size of a dog, maybe 40 pounds, but the head was massive, its teeth still stuck in my shoulder. I could feel warm blood running down my back. My dogs both leapt up and started biting and scratching at this thing, which caused it to release its grip on my shoulder. I threw it into the bush, and my dogs ran after it. "What the heck was that?" my brother exclaimed. "I don't know, man. Let's just get the heck out of here," I replied. The girls were really freaking out now, but we started crashing through the woods, running as fast as we could, incurring more than a few cuts and scratches in the process. I was shouting at the top of my lungs for my dogs, who still had not returned yet. Finally, I saw them up in front of us. They had the thing treed. It was about 20 feet up in a tree, hissing and spitting down at them. It looked up when it saw me and let out a horrible high-pitched shriek. It sounded like a megaphone being played through an amplifier. It made me want to puke. I could see it clearly now. It was holding on to the tree with what looked to be long claws attached to thin, bony arms. The tail, if you could call it that, was wrapped around the tree. Its head looked vaguely human, but the thing was anything but. Its eyes were clearly the same as the thing we'd seen the night before. Big, milky white marble-like eyes that seemed to ooze spite and malice. It had translucent skin that was stretched tight across its skull. It had no nose or ears that I could see, but its mouth was huge, still red with blood from biting my shoulder. I could see rows of tiny little teeth. It had a long, pointed tongue that it was using to hiss and spit at the dogs. I picked up a rock the size of a baseball. Biting through the pain, I beamed it right at the thing, hitting it square in its face. It shrieked again and jumped out of the tree. As soon as it hit the ground, it began using its arms to crawl towards me, but the dogs were fast and pinned it to the ground, biting and tearing with all their might. It tried to fight back, but these dogs had a combined weight of at least 150 pounds. They regularly killed small animals, so they had a taste for blood, and they were going berserk. I'm not sure if they killed the thing or what, but it wasn't moving. I grabbed my dogs by their collars, and we got the heck out of there. We made it back to the beach where my brother and the girls were already grabbing our things. We tore up the trail and threw the stuff in the back of my truck before peeling out of there. We'd only gone about 50 yards when that thing threw itself out onto the road in front of us. I didn't have time to react, but we could feel it go under the tires. When I looked back in the rearview mirror, I couldn't see it. I figured it had just crawled off into the brush and kept driving. I wish I could say that was the end of it. We drove straight through Tacoma, where we stopped and got a motel for the night. Tacoma has a rather sketchy reputation, so we tried to bring as much of our gear inside as we could. Well, I'll be danged. That thing had been clinging to the undercarriage that entire time, and was now crawling up from under the truck and onto the tailgate. Luckily, the dogs were still in the bed of the truck, so they started charging and biting the thing. It fell off and began crawling towards me again, its hideous face mangled and mean. My dogs jumped out of the bed of the truck, commencing to tear the thing to shreds. Now I knew it was dead. The dogs had bitten right through the neck, separating the head from the rest of the body. We called the cops, but no one showed up. The motel must have thought it was just some old roadkill or something, but we didn't stick around to find out. We dropped Lauren off at the SeaTac airport and drove straight back to Anacortes to catch the ferry home. I don't know if this thing was a crawler or rake or what. I always thought that was just the stuff of nightmares, an urban legend if you will. But those legends have to come from something.